So exciting.
Dr. Healey, welcome to the Astro Ben podcast. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's very exciting to meet you. As we were talking just before we hit record, I feel like we've met before somehow, somewhere, probably in the UK, because we have a few mutual friends in contact. But yeah, very nice to meet you properly.
Yeah, lovely to meet you. Yeah, you definitely look very familiar from somewhere.
So let's start with where you have been for the last, I don't know how long you've been doing it, but for the last week or two, you've been busy doing something. Can you tell me or not tell me about what you've been up to?
Yeah, so I was just saying, I was really fortunate to get through the first round of the recent astronaut selection with ESA and to be called to Hamburg, like lots of other people. And yeah, really exciting to be part of the process. I'm not allowed to say anything about sort of what was involved while I was there, but yeah, just excited to be sort of in the mix and taking part.
So epic. Well, how many people got through the first rounds? Do you know that?
No, I don't. No sort of official numbers have been given out, and in fact, they're still calling people. I've heard that they're going to be calling people for a few more months. No sort of specifics have been given, but we were told that most likely the earliest that we'll hear anything will be sort of January time.
Oh wow! So you have to wait and basically forget about it, and then.
I know, which is easier said than done, right?
Yeah. Well, one of my favourite phrases in life is never give up, and I think it's probably going to be one of those things that you might have to apply for numerous times. But
that's it, yeah.
Because I think even
we've got to keep the dream alive.
Yeah, because I think even like in the Apollo program, like Buzz Aldrin he didn't get in first time. So even those kind of icons that you think were like best in class and.
As well, I mean, she certainly waited her turn to go to space and finally made it a few weeks ago. So there's hope for us all if Wally can get up there.
Absolutely. What's your thoughts on civilian spaceflight?
I think it's really exciting, and I think it's something that's sort of been talked about for so long, and then this year we really see it sort of skyrocketing, literally. And I think it's a really exciting time for the space program because we're seeing all the collaborations between commercial and governmental spaceflight, which is really allowing a lot of exciting things to happen and sort of progress to be made. So I think the collaboration is brilliant and really exciting.
Yeah, I thought the Inspiration 4 mission was truly something else. I mean, that really, I don't know, because you're obviously, well, I assume you're British like me, right?
Yeah, I am.
You should never make any assumptions about these things, but it was one of the only things that sort of trickled through to the UK because you watch the news here, you don't really hear a lot about what's going on in space, but it really sort of transcended borders and it seems to have got a lot of people excited. The fact that, and the fact that, the normal people could spend 3 days in space, it is very inspiring.
I think it made it a lot more accessible for everyone, and because of that, it's sort of it's easier to get on board with something. And I think I remember that when I first got involved with the space industry. Initially before I'd gone to the Astronaut Centre, it just seemed like this kind of inaccessible industry, and it just wasn't something for normal people to be involved in. And as soon as you sort of take those first steps, you realise that space really is for everyone, and I think that's the really exciting thing about commercial spaceflight is it's really opening it up and opening up people's sort of hopes and dreams really to go into space, whether or not that ends up happening to each of us. I think definitely it does seem more of a realistic hope.
Well, I'm very excited by it because I'm nowhere near as smart as people like you, so if I applied to ESA to be an astronaut, I don't even think my email would get through. There's
not fine. No, you definitely would.
No, I know I'm not useful enough in terms of having something that could be valued in the traditional sense. But I'm very hopeful for civilian space flight. I'll take a Blue Origin flight, Virgin Galactic. If SpaceX managed to you know, make vacating to the moon a thing, I'll definitely be first in line.
And that's, I thought William Shatner's going to go to space as well in the next few weeks. So,
Yeah,
so we're going to have work going up.
I'm a bit conflicted about that, to be honest, only because I am a Star Trek fan, and the idea of Shatner going up is very exciting, obviously. But he's, you know, like a few weeks ago, we had Wally Funk going up, you know. Yeah. So haven't they already done the world's oldest person? And it's like, you know, in terms of why we're taking civilians to space is partly for the overview effect. So they come back and then communicate and experience, you know, tell people about their experience. But, you know, sadly, William Shatner's not going to have a huge amount of time to do that. So do you think that's a good move? What do you think?
William Shatner.
I definitely won't. Hope he doesn't listen to the podcast.
Well, I mean, I think there's different reasons to go to space, and I mean, I'm very much of the sort of, I like the idea of going to space to take part in scientific research and what it is that we can bring back down to Earth, and that's always been sort of my motivation really, to go up there. But that's not to dismiss sort of other people's reasons and ideas for going up there as well. So I'm not sure if there should necessarily be an age limit, but I think there's got to be some sort of benefit of going up there for everyone.
Yeah,
if we can.
Absolutely. So let's talk about your career to date. So why don't you start? So all I know is that you are a medical doctor, but perhaps where does it start for you? Where did you get the idea to become a doctor in the first place, and did you also have the idea that you'd like to be in the space industry as well?
Well, I never really wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be an explorer. That was kind of where it all stemmed from, I suppose. And then at school, unfortunately, you know, explorer wasn't really an option when you're choosing to go to uni. And so probably medicine was one of the other things that I liked the most. And I guess that really reflected the fact that I didn't really want to be in an office. And I thought that was a good choice if you don't want to be working in an office. And so I kind of fell into it, really. And then as soon as I went to med school, I got really interested in sort of the idea of expedition medicine and sort of extreme environment physiology. And that combined with a love of skiing kind of took me to lots of cold places. So I ended up working as like an expedition doctor and as actually just sort of medical logistical support teams up a lot in the Arctic. I went up to sort of Greenland, worked in Little Inuit hospital there, and worked for logistic companies supporting kind of high-end expeditions, getting them into remote locations. And from that, I went in sort of two different ways, really. One was the kind of extreme physiology route, which I became increasingly interested in, sort of how people respond to hypoxia, so sort of low levels of oxygen that you see on the top of mountains. And the other was just generally being interested in cold climates in the Arctic. And I met lots of people who had been to Antarctica. So that led me on to applying for a course in 2010, so a while ago now, at the European Astronaut Centre when I was a med student. And it was the first one that they ever ran for space physiology. And sort of extreme environment physiology. I remember sort of arriving and knowing absolutely nothing about space, and it was just quite overwhelming, having sort of barbecue with astronauts and meeting these people and kind of realizing that everyone was actually like a real person that worked in space, and that I kind of fitted in a lot more than I thought I would. I thought everyone would be like super geeky and like not very nice, and I don't know, and a bit aloof. And you kind of arrive and then they're actually like really super friendly and really welcoming. So I guess that was the thing that kind of really made me think, oh, maybe space might be for me, and it kind of also made me realize that space in many ways is about exploration. You know, it's exploring the world that we live in through research, and sort of, you know, it really is, for me at least, kind of the next frontier of exploration. So that kind of made my ears prick up, I suppose. And then I ended up going to Antarctica with the European Space Agency quite a few years later. And I applied for that post because I was interested in the stuff that I'd learned about when I was at the Astronaut Centre, and also it was sort of a double bonus really because I got to go to Antarctica, which was the other place that I'd always wanted to visit. So it was a bit of a no-brainer to apply, and it was one of these things that I really, quite honestly, didn't think I'd get. And then when I got the email to say that I was going, I just kind of knew that I would always live to regret not going, so I didn't really give it much thought. thought about actually going and working there. So that was kind of really how I got into the space industry, I guess.
That's pretty epic. So first of all, I'd like to, because I'm, you have to explain to me in layman's terms, what is extreme environment physiology? Because in my mind, it's like, I don't know, I'm imagining like films where you've got like Arctic expeditions and, and like everything going wrong and frostbite and, you can't start a fire because it's like extremely windy. Like, what does that entail?
I mean, it is quite a broad topic, as you say, but it essentially just means like pushing the human body to the limits. I'm really interested in like performance, how far we can push ourselves, but also when you're looking at medicine, looking at diseases, you can often kind of simulate disease processes by looking at how the body reacts in other situations. So, for example, the good example is going up a mountain where you have hypoxia with the low oxygen, and a lot of, say, our intensive care patients also have low levels of oxygen as well, and so you can learn about how the human body responds to low levels of oxygen when you're up a mountain, and from that you can sort of infer how people might be responding in intensive care as well. So it's kind of a good place to do research, and that's really what Antarctica is all about. So it's like using these extreme environments as what they call it an analogue for space, and an analogue just means kind of any environment which replicates an element of space. And so ESA have lots of different analogue programs. So, for example, you've got like the underwater one, which is NEMO project.
The NEMO project, did
Astronaut.
you say?
Yeah,
that's a great name.
And you can simulate weightlessness and neutral buoyancy that you see in diving, and you can do research projects as well, looking at that. Or the other thing would be, say, bed rest studies where people get paid to spend long periods of time in bed, where that replicates sort of muscle and bone wasting that you also see in intensive care, but in other sort of disease processes as well.
Wow. So I guess the last couple of years for you, with forced isolation due to COVID, you were sort of prepared for it mentally.
It's weird, like preparing to go into lockdown, those kind of few panic days that we had before everything shut, and it was weirdly a bit of a deja vu to when I've been packing and getting ready to go to Antarctica, because you're kind of thinking ahead to what you're going to need for this period, because you're not going to have access to stuff like you had before, and it was just that kind of deja vu feeling, and it suddenly made me realise how similar actually isolation was to the isolation that we experienced in Antarctica, and that was the big thing that ESA were researching when we were down there, was the isolation of the crew and how we responded and sort of crew dynamics. And I mean, at that point we had no idea that the whole world was going to go into isolation just a few years on, so it kind of demonstrates really as well how a lot of the problems that we encounter in space are also relevant to life back here on Earth as well, and what we can learn from space research for kind of terrestrial setting medicine too.
Massively. So how long did you spend in Concordia? In Concordia or on Concordia? I don't know how you...
So Concordia is the base, so in Concordia, and then Dome Charlie is where it was. I guess you could say on Dome Charlie if you like. I was away for 14 months. I didn't spend the whole time at Concordia Station, but I spent that in Antarctica.
You spent 14 months in Antarctica?
Yeah, I was there for a very long time, yeah.
Wow. I mean, I don't know where you'd start with that. What did you learn about yourself in that time?
Oh gosh, lots of things. It does sort of strip back a lot of stuff, you can't really hide from yourself when you're in that environment. I definitely came out of it, I would say, slightly different probably as an individual. I was a lot more confident, I think, when I came out about sort of what I could achieve and what I could do. And I don't know, I think something like that does change you as a person. I think, you're chatting about the overview effect that astronauts have when they go to space, and down normally from the cupola window to Earth, and how that changes their perspective. I think in many ways, going to Antarctica and going through the long polar night where you kind of lose the sun, in a way kind of replicated, well, not completely the same, but it certainly made me kind of take a different perspective to life back home, because you really did feel, particularly when you didn't have the sun, that you were kind of disconnected from home. And the sun's that weird thing that wherever you are in the world, it's that familiar feature. If you go on holiday like halfway around the world, you'll still have the sunlight you have back here, but to lose that, you kind of felt disconnected. And when it came back up, you're kind of looking at the same thing that friends and family are back home as well. So it was a funny thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of mind-boggling, really, to because so few people have experienced that. So it's easy to see the parallels between that analog mission and what it must be like going to Mars. I mean, how long does it take to get to Mars? 4 to 6 months, something like that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's difficult to say how long it will take for the potential mission. I mean, you can get there in lots of different ways, but if you take a longer orbit, a longer trajectory, then that can, depending on the trajectory that you take, reduce the risk of radiation. So you can get there much quicker, but if you want to go on an orbit which is not going to completely irradiate the crew, then it will be much longer. So Mars 500 is quite a nice example of an analog mission that was done by the space agencies combined, and that was kind of considered to be about the kind of time scale that they were thinking for a sort of there and back mission with a bit of time on Mars. So we'll see how that changes over time in terms of what the reality is. But certainly the thing that will be the big change is the fact that currently, if astronauts have sort of a medical problem or a reason to evacuate on the ISS, currently you can normally evacuate within sort of half a day to a day, whereas obviously if you're going a lot further away, then that's not going to be possible anymore. So they're having to sort of change kind of the medical models that we're using, and the crew setup because of that, and also the different sort of psychological pressures that it puts on the crew there as well.
How did you, actually the day we're recording this, we just had Mental Health Day. How did your mental health survive through that period? One assumes there'd be ups and downs.
I actually found the hardest bit before the winter, which seems a little bit perverse, but I found it really hard when I arrived at Concordia and I had that initial summer. And you'd have lots of people there who had kind of either seen overwinter cruise before, or lots of people came back summer after summer, and they were quite happy to share with you like their horror stories about what goes down during the winter months, whether or not they'd actually have the overwinter themselves. And also, it would all been a bit hectic. From sort of getting the job, I ended up sort of travelling a lot, going to all these different institutes in America quite a bit, to kind of learn about all the different projects and experiments I was going to do. And I had shipped out to Chamonix to learn about mountain rescue, and it was all, and then saying goodbye to everybody. So it was all a bit hectic, and so then you kind of suddenly arrive in Antarctica in the summer, where actually for the ESA doctor that's quite a chilled time. You're just kind of setting up experiments because the research really is done over the winter where we're looking at the isolation. So you kind of then have that time to kind of reflect and think about what you're letting yourself in for. And I kind of had a bit of a mental battle at that time to be like, is this the right decision? What am I letting myself in for? What if something goes wrong? What if I have an appendicitis and I can't be evacuated? And I think it was that little bit of time where you had to think about what you were letting yourself in for, which was much more challenging. And actually, it was kind of almost a relief when the last plane left, because you kind of suddenly stopped thinking about that, because suddenly leaving was no longer an option. So it actually kind of weirdly went out of my mind, the idea of leaving, and I kind of felt almost relaxed about it because you didn't have to make that decision anymore, because it was made, and that was that, and you kind of had to crack on with what you were doing.
I think, I don't want to talk about COVID because I'm sick of talking about it, but there does seem to be a similarity where when you literally can't leave your house, you have to find solace in little things, and you have to find routines, because otherwise you're going to go mad. So, I mean, because of the nature of why you were there, was the whole year planned out for you? So you knew you had to do these experiments, and then You know, you had certain roles and responsibilities that made the routine was sort of given to you by ESA as a framework to work with.
Yes and no. So before we went to the Astronaut Centre, and we had what's called human behaviour performance training, and that's all about sort of how to live and work effectively together as part of a crew. And it's similar training to what astronauts have before they go to space, and it's the same team which were training us as astronauts have. And so that was all about these kind of, strategies to cope with the isolation and how to manage that as a crew. And they certainly gave us a lot of guidance about what they've learned from previous overwinters in terms of what had been successful. And quite interestingly, actually, one of the, what was considered as kind of one of the more successful overwinters down there was actually the first winter. And that was because the base hadn't completely been finished by the time they decided to overwinter. It was a bit touch and go as to whether they were going to overwinter or not. And in the end, they decided that it was kind of ready enough that it was safe, but there were lots of rooms that hadn't been decorated or hadn't had all the furniture made and whatnot. And because the crew actually had that big task, which was a really big communal task, and they were super busy, it was actually one of the most successful winters because they had this big task that they were all doing together. So there was a lot of group achievement, a lot of working together, a lot of shared goals and responsibilities, and it was actually really good for team dynamics to have that. And we found that actually sort of shared goals within the crew was really useful, and so they tried to sort of artificially create that for us as well, because you would all go down there with your own job role, sort of be the technical team with plumber, mechanic, technical people, and then there would be the scientists, and we would all sort of be doing our own different experiments, whether it's glaciology, there's lots of ice drilling at Concordia, and then myself doing the ESA project. So all of our kind of overall goals were quite separate. So one of the big things was trying to sort of make us work together as a team, so cleaning the base all together, doing things together for midwinter, which is kind of like Christmas of Antarctica, and sort of interacting with the other bases over Skype and stuff like that as well, and doing it together as a crew. And they made our lunch and dinner a compulsory event as well. So you had to go. And that was also reflecting the fact that we had the long polar night with 105 days of darkness where you couldn't really tell whether it was night or day. So it was a weird period where people's sleep-wake cycles could just shift all over the place. And so that was to try and keep us together as a crew in terms of communicating, was to try and have lunches and stuff together.
So interesting.
Which I think was really... So
assume you do get through the next round of astronaut training. Imagine, you had imposter syndrome last time, and that was it was valid at the time, but you still got, you spent a year in the Antarctic. So say you get through. What is this? Is this the Artemis? Is this the Artemis missions? Is this Generation Artemis the first woman back to the moon and onto Mars?
Well, we can hope. We can hope. Yeah.
And it's
that would.
Yeah, and it's interesting that assuming that the tech side of things is there, which seems to be, always is getting there. It's going to come down to people. It's going to come down to a team working together, and it's just interesting how a big part of these analog missions and then also astronaut training is about behaviour and the dynamics within a team.
Absolutely, and I think in many ways that's going to be the biggest challenge of all, really. I have no doubt that we're going to get the right tools and technology to get us to Mars, and I really think the human aspect will definitely be the bigger challenge in the end.
So is that your sort of life mission now, would you say? I know it might sound a bit silly to you saying for it, but it's definitely aspirationally it's something that it's right up there.
Of course. I'd love nothing more than to get through this astronaut selection, of course. But having said that, I also just want to, for me, it's about being part of it, and a big motivation when I was down in Concordia, really, because, you just have those days where you're just like, what on earth am I doing? You'd be repeating the same tests with people that didn't particularly want to be doing them. in the middle of winter, and it all just seemed like so far away from space or whatever it was, but actually for me, like, I kind of felt really motivated because I knew that what we were doing down there would in some small way help to get us to Mars at some point. and for me that was really exciting, and I think that was the biggest thing that sort of got me through the days where it did feel really tough, and when you didn't particularly want to be there, or if you'd rather be somewhere else, or you're having being a bit homesick. It was just knowing that you're part of that bigger dream, really. And so I already feel that, even though, unfortunately I may not be the astronaut myself stepping foot on Mars, I already feel part of that project, and I think we all are, really. Even if you're sort of involved in space research in any way, or even just sort of having the dream of going, I think we'll all kind of be weirdly on board that spaceship without being too cheesy. I kind of already feel part of the space industry, and I think that's what's so great about it, and I think that's why it inspires everyone. It's not really just about sending one person there. It's because you need everybody, all the behind the scene people, and all the research and all of that stuff, and all of us working together sort of internationally to get that person there. You all feel part of it,
Absolutely.
It's like mission control when they landed on the moon, calling back to Houston, and you're there, even if you're not actually.
Well, it's interesting that when we go back to the moon, now we live in an age with the internet and smartphones. And it's just going to be, hopefully it's going to be a really surreal kind of world where we can, watch people on the moon live on our phones, which is so mind-boggling if you think about it.
It is nuts, isn't it? I mean, I see the moon as being a bit like Antarctica is today, in X number of years, because at the moment you've got Antarctica, okay, it's remote, but it's like you can go there, you can go there as a tourist, it's still got its dangers, but then all of the sort of scientific research it kind of is a research platform ultimately, and you've got all these sort of government-funded research platforms, which are the stations, and I kind of hope to see, in many ways, that being the moon within our sort of generation.
Definitely. It's an outpost. It's an outpost for exploration, and yeah, I mean, I see films like First Man, and I like the idea that it's kind of like a Vegas where you've got like you've got restaurants and nightclubs and all that sort of thing. But joking aside, I think we're just very lucky to be alive in this time, and it's super exciting. What's your thoughts on companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic? We've talked about them a little bit, but how do you think they're part of the puzzle? Which are you most compelled by? Which one do you do you think SpaceX have got it in the bag? Or do you think Blue Origin, they may be,
I mean, I think they all have their own sort of character and their own pros and cons, I suppose. But I think they're all inspiring, and I respect them all in very much their own right. I think it's incredible, some of the things that they've been able to achieve, and I think that sort of governmental commercial collaboration really is the way forward, and I think it's very exciting to see, and I'm excited as well to see that it does seem to be more of a collaboration rather than the competition, which I thought at one point might be more the story, but just kind of adding into the mix, and I think it really is enabling a lot of stuff to happen as well, and moving things forward at a much faster rate than if we had just kind of kept
absolutely. So when you're not having dreams of space exploration and doing your day job, which you're an A&E doctor, right? In your day job.
Well, I'm all over the place. During the pandemic, I've been doing intensive care, and I'm doing a bit of anaesthetics at the moment, just because I need that experience as well. So I'm kind of, but yeah, my background is mainly emergency medicine.
Got it. So when you're not working, what do you do in your spare time? Do you have any spare time?
Everyone's got to have spare time. I'm always outside. I'm always kind of doing something. Not very good at sitting still, which might seem strange given the weather. So to myself in Antarctica. Well, I mean, I was living in the Alps for years, so skiing is my main passion. But this year I've been learning to surf. I've been going climbing a bit, trail running a lot. Did my first aquathlon yesterday, which was quite fun. Yeah, all sorts really.
What's a aquathlon? Is that a marathon in the water?
Well, I didn't know yesterday, but it's like a triathlon, but just without the bike, and that's just because I was lazy and didn't want to take my bike to London.
So it's a logistics thing for you.
It's a logistical issue, yeah. But it was great fun. It was with some good doctor friends actually. So although we had to get up at 4:30 in the morning, which was less fun, but I enjoyed the crunch afterwards. So yeah.
Amazing. Well, look, I really want to know more about what the astronaut application process was like. So I might have to get you back on at some point next year. But I wish you all the luck in the world with that, and it's been great to speak to you.
Thank you very much. No, I really enjoyed it, and thanks for having me on.